This is the Content Strategy Insights podcast, episode number 117. The benefits of structured content are now well known. Improved consistency, the ability to scale, quicker content delivery, more governable content operations, efficient localization of content for other countries and cultures. But even the most progressive and successful companies are still working to fully adopt this important content practice. In this interview, Kate Thomas shares insights that she has gleaned as they've structured the marketing content at PayPal.
Welcome to the Content Strategy Insights podcast, where accomplished content strategy experts share their wisdom with our friends in the content community. Our mission is to democratize content strategy, to make its principles and practices accessible to everyone. And now, here's your host, Larry Swanson.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode number 117 of the Content Strategy Insights podcast. I am really happy today to have with us Kate Thomas. Kate is a content architect at PayPal, and she's working on some really interesting structured content and CMS work there. So welcome, Kate. Tell the folks a little bit more about what you're up to these days.
Hi, Larry. Thanks for having me. Yes, we're working, at PayPal, we've been working for the past couple of years on moving all the marketing content on PayPal.com from hand-coded, handcrafted pages into a structured content framework delivered in a headless CMS.
Nice. Yeah. And so have you been involved from the very start with that? Is it kind of your baby, this project, or?
Kind of my baby in the sense that I was asked to work, and I thought, well, that's now my baby. It's someone else's bigger baby, but I'm the midwife, I suppose, of the content model in a way. So we had new management come in and head up PayPal.com. When you look at PayPal.com, there's lots of things going on. So when I'm talking about it, all I'm talking about is the marketing content. So on PayPal.com, you can also get help content, you can get legal content, and there's a whole lot of campaign pages that exist, but they're sort of outside of the core marketing pages. So the first thing is to qualify. We're talking about the core content that we deliver in marketing. And management changed, sort of the person in charge of .com changed in mid-2020, got some consultants in to advise on how can we do this better, because it was sort of at that time, and a lot of the site now still actually, it's standalone pages. Someone in PayPal needs something up on the site, so they go directly to the web operations team, sort of web ops, and say, hey, Scrum team, can you build this? And they build it in code based on some vague like content types and templates, but not content types and templates structured in any way. And page gets built, job done. So there's no, we should take this site down now, we should remove this page, it's out of date, or someone's got a page up similar but no one knows that it's there. So this wasn't an ideal way to manage a site, because of course PayPal, we're in 200 markets, I think, something like that. I can confirm that and get it back to you. And dozens of languages. So every time an engineer had to build this in one language, they had to then essentially copy and paste for the rest. So for the languages, so not particularly scalable. So we had some advice about, let's build deliver.com in a headless CMS. I had been working in another part of PayPal, and one of the things I'd done was start to model the legal content. The legal department had come to us 18 months before and said, hey, can we deliver our site more efficiently? So I'd done a content model for that, for the main legal agreement, the user agreement, that, something like 320 million people have signed, because that's the number of PayPal customers there are. And I'm pretty sure no one has ever read it, but after modeling it, I can tell you I have read all of it. So I'd done that work and come over, and then was asked to come over and help and do similar for the .com marketing content. So that's through the rest of 2020, so Q3 into Q4, I looked at the content, and as with any project like this, the most important piece is the content itself. So what does the content need to do? What are its characteristics? I can't obviously build a model unless I know the full context of the content. So what identified the fields that we would need in the content model. I also hired a taxonomist, a contract taxonomist, just to help us, because I realised, and I had hugely supportive management. The new head of PayPal.com. Many of your listeners will know her, Lucy Hyde. She'd been at PayPal for some time, but she'd moved across into this role. So Lucy, I just went to Lucy. I said, "Hey, I think we have an opportunity here to sort of fix this properly." There'd always been a great investment in the content, presentation of content, how it looked, beautiful images, but almost none in the semantic layer or the metadata of the content. So I said, if we're doing the headless CMS, let's get a taxonomist involved, and so we can start to build that layer underneath as well. So we went into
Yeah, I was going to say that, when we talked before we went on the air, we thought, we should set out what kind of exactly what structured content is before we get going. But you just did it. I mean, I didn't ask the question, but you kind of did it anyway.
Yeah.
It's because you set out all the need to structure it, the need to get away from it just kills me that people are still hand building web pages in the 21st century. But that need to systematize the page building and all the management that goes with that. But then you added in the last piece there, the hiring the taxonomist and the ascribing the semantic meaning to the content. Tell me about how, and I think I have my thoughts about this, but I'm curious how those two work together for you, how the structure of the content and the metadata, the taxonomies and other stuff that describe it, how those work together.
Well, at the moment, how it will work is I've defined the model and identified the content types we need. Got a bunch of content types. We know what kind of content they're delivering, and we've got a taxonomy for those for that content. We'll be using a third party to knit these two things together at the end. And what this means for us is that we have really a source of truth that we've never had before for all of our content. We can track and manage it more easily. We also, long term, can then do more with that content. At the moment, the taxonomy is pretty straightforward and basic. It's and it's really delivering internal benefits for us, so we have a better sense of what we've got, and some SEO benefits as well, obviously, because we're being far more kind of thorough and consistent with our language and what we're calling things. And we've worked very closely with the SEO team on that.
When you mention SEO, I think all of a sudden I'm wondering, that is the classic use case for structured, especially marketing content, to better do that. But there must be other cases, like you also alluded anyway earlier to, like the kind of operational, not exactly optimized thing about hand building web pages. Can you run through sort of the list of reasons you moved to structured content?
Well, mostly because we want to scale as a business. I mean, PayPal is already hugely successful, but there's plenty of companies nipping at our heels. So the business brains at PayPal are, want to stay cutting edge and want to continue to be at the forefront of these things, which we cannot do if it takes us 30 to 35 days to publish a page, which it does in the old way, because the brief has to go to someone, Scrum team has to build it by hand, it's like tedious QA, so we could not continue with that. So so speed to market was the main reason why we moved to structured content, but also because localization, as I said, we're in multiple languages, and there were some services that we did have localization, third-party localization services, but not managed programmatically really at all. So it was a copy and paste exercise. So also not scalable. So they're really the biggest reasons. And long term, we're not realizing the benefit of this yet, but the metadata that we apply to the content will serve us well for ongoing management of the content, particularly internally, because PayPal is a massive organization, something like 25,000 people work there, all in different teams, and all sort of with their own perhaps variety of what it is, what product they're building. So the very fact of having a taxonomic definition of our products with all the variables of that sort of locked down somewhere from which people draw that rather than write it themselves, I mean, that will really be incredibly helpful for us to sort of help keep our house in order.
Yeah, no, the way you just described that is like, well, I guess, you clearly articulated the benefits. Did you do like a formal ROI analysis or anything? Like, everything you said makes perfect sense, and I don't think you'd have any problem convincing certainly any content person and most managers. But did you have to sell this at all, I guess?
The taxonomy?
The tax, well, not only the taxonomy, but also just the notion of structuring the content itself and all that, because it's not an insignificant investment, but it seems like you've articulated some really clear benefits. Yeah.
No, I didn't. Fortunately, there were highly paid consultants who did that. So they saved me the trouble. So that was, I mean, nice. I know it was sort of inferred in their, long PowerPoint deck of where it was like to justify a headless CMS. So a headless CMS has to have content types. And so if you have content types, you need structured content. So they did that job for me. And they, and it, PayPal's got smart people running it, and they see the reasons why you would do that. I mean, we're a tech company, right? So it takes a lot to convince a bunch of ex-engineers perhaps that, building in code isn't the right way to go, but, their business brain as well as an engineering brains tell them that we have to sort of not deliver content in code, but we have to deliver it sort of far more smartly. Mm-hmm. So that's what we are starting to do.
Another thing we were talking about before we went on the air was your interest in governance and how that kind of led to your current role. And like that last thing you were saying about the saving and ongoing maintenance of the content. And like, I was thinking immediately of like, when do you retire old content, or, all those conventional governance and CMS and content operational kind of things. Can you talk a little bit about like how governance brought you this way? How your interest in governance, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. I used to before I think I really understood structured content, because I'd never worked. I mean, anyone who has worked in tech writing or anything like that will understand structured content. I'd never done that up until that point. In fact, that was the first thing I did at PayPal. I worked on the developer portal and worked on the content strategy for the DevDocs site. So that was like my first foray into really big structured content. But we had, just lost my train of thought. Just repeat the question.
Just how governance, how that interest in governance led you towards, implementing structured content programs. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Because so structured content is essentially giving governance to content. You're defining rules, you're giving it boundaries, you're giving it context. So these are the sorts of things that say what I am, and it's like what I can be. Like I might be this or I might be this, so I have to build something into a model. But when I used to work so before structured content, before content modeling, I was a huge fan of content governance, because I started my content strategy and content management career in higher education, building online learning systems for universities. And then I moved from there into different roles in the Australian federal government. And so my first kind of move into the web, sort of in the late 90s and in the 2000s, was in public sector institutions where governance is embedded. So for me, it was totally normal to have to think about the context of your content and the who was going to approve it, why we have it, how long it was going to be there, who was going to pay for it, and how we're going to resource it, which are all the things you think about in a governance framework. So I was very much all about governance. And when I started working sort of 10, 12 years ago, big digital agencies, which is all about marketing and making it happen. And suddenly I was surrounded by people who could make pretty things and build amazing sites without thinking about any of the things that I just thought about kind of automatically, if you like, because that's how I'd started. And so I found myself, and big agencies have big clients, which are sort of the size of governments, global multinationals are as complex and as bureaucratic as the government agencies. So they have their own inbuilt governance processes and stuff. So it was quite useful. I ended up doing. I quite enjoy working at that level at agencies because you're applying something really applicable and useful for these brands who know they can't just spend, $20-30 million or pounds on a project without this tracking. And so I was able to bring that governance framework to that. And then, through that, started seeing, I really had my first exposure to the importance of being able to scale content across different, not only just devices and different formats and such, but into different languages, which is obviously where I started thinking structured content. And so you start going, okay, so it was much easier to talk to clients I was always only about the governance, but in a way, a structured content approach gives you the language to translate what has to happen to the content and how we're going to treat the content and what job the content needs to do. You could use the language of governance, but you're actually, structured content sort of saves you from having to talk at a very kind of individual level of that content, which is sort of impossible.
I'm really curious. I'm curious now about like two of the things you mentioned. Like, I don't know how long that stint, you mentioned that you worked for a while in the developer portal at PayPal. So you've been exposed to that tech writing world. And did they use like a DITA-based component?
No, they didn't. They used just use Markdown.
Just Markdown, so they're the developer-driven place doing. There's like the two ways. But regardless, you got on top of structured content there, and then your interest in governance. Those are like two things that are hardwired in your head, having done them so much. I think a lot of people, have you ever thought about how to do like a mind meld of that? Because a lot of folks, I'm lucky to have had a little bit of exposure to governance issues and stuff early on, but I still feel like I could use a mind meld from somebody like you about like, no, here's how you just internalize thinking about, structure and governance. Yeah.
I have not done that, but I think that would be useful. And in fact, at the moment where, to bring it back to PayPal, the work we started in mid 2020, we launched in sort of June, I think 2021, our first CMS pages, which is hugely exciting, and we're continuing just to roll that out with different things. And as part of that, we're getting some advice on some governance frameworks, and so we're looking as a company at developing that governance framework now. So I think that's timely, and it's not really until our conversation that I sort of thought, structured content, they're very, very tightly linked. And I think, governance gets such a bad rap, and obviously in a financial markets company like I work in, we're so cognizant of regulations and rules, so we're totally sort of all over this, and so people tend to see governance as a restriction, or something's holding them back, or it's something someone says you can't do, which is kind of in a way, but for kind of good reason. So I think, we can, with this with our rollout that we're doing in the CMS, we by necessity have to also roll out a governance framework, because it is changing how content happens, and we have to start thinking more purposefully about our content and what we're doing. We can't just do it. We can't just ask our colleagues at PayPal who need to get content on the site. They're used to going to someone, like I said, and just say, build this for me, WebOps team, you can hand code this. We have to give them a path forward so they can still do what they need to do. But now they need to understand, I need to do it for this country, but it's going to translate out to these. There are implications of that. We have to account for the regulations, the differing regulations in those countries. One of the things that I'm really hopeful that the governance framework will capture, that we're working on, will be how we can do that thinking upstream. And I've just realised, Larry, where the perfect mind meld happens. It happens in the content model, because when, boom, the content model, the source of revenue. Because one of the things in the rollout that we've done so far for the past 12 months, we did it US first, US English first, and then we started to roll out into different languages and different markets. And everyone was operating as if it was the old way. So here's something I want to do, and where every market around the world always just did whatever they wanted, so they could, and so the first rollout was painful. The second rollout, we did a bit more streamlining upstream. So we did some of that alignment that was necessary. We did it before we hit the authoring and publishing stage. The third wave was slightly better, but it's been a great learning, and really important lessons are going to feed into this sort of governance framework, and we'll capture it upstream. I happen to be in sort of a slightly unique position, because I'm the only one at PayPal, I'm the only content architect working on .com. So I build all of the models that we need. And because I've got a long history of doing sort of content strategy, but also being that person, being that content manager who has to make the interface in front of me work. I have to publish something on the site. I have to make sure it works. When I built all the models, it's very much the author in mind, because I want to make sure the author is supported, because if the author is supported, they have a good authoring experience, we'll have quality content, because without a good authoring experience, we can't have quality content. So as I said, I'm in a unique position to understand not only what the content needs, and so therefore build the model, but I'm doing that with the experience of having been that person stuck in front of crummy CMS. Which
Who was it? Oh, you reminded me when Dean Barker was on. I had talking about CMSs a while back, and he said, the main reason I get business is because people hate their CMS. And to your focus on the authors, it's like, maybe let's start there. But it also kind of harkens to this notion that comes up all the time in these interviews that, there's a lot of technical stuff and content stuff here, but this is really a people thing. And so much of it is like, and governance is all about helping people understand what they need to do. And you just talked about, like, I'm curious, you talked about, I love your focus on authors, but before that you had said something about, I was inferring some rogue actors maybe in the first implementation of this, that people were still doing it the old way. Did you have to do any convincing or?
Oh, well, to be fair to them, I mean, we hadn't done any education. I mean, things move at a crazy speed of light sometimes at PayPal. So our team was like plowing ahead, building the CMS pages, and then presented to other markets and said, hey, so now you've got to use these templates and do this, which was, not an ideal sort of process. So we've really fixed this as one of our lessons. But that's sort of normal. It's like we worked with stakeholders globally, and it just took some time to educate and convince. I mean, all of their all of their content, all of their pages are in the CMS. All of them pretty much follow the same rules and standards and guidelines.
Well,
Everything.
yeah. No, that actually leads me to a question about the content modeling. Like when you had this huge bunch of existing marketing pages to work with. Was that sort of the genesis of the model? You kind of start there and then structure it based on what's
So I just did the content strategists who had worked on the first batch of pages that we did. I really worked closely with her. I took her content strategy. She had done this is the job of this, what job this is doing, because she had had to write all of the words, and she's highly experienced, so she wrote it in a structured way, which is Excel, of course, it's a structure, but there was enough in there to what had she done? So she had worked very closely with the UX. We have a really big and strong UX design department. So she worked with her design partners. So they called this the reasons to believe, which were the 3 key points, the hero, all of these. So she got the sort of the start of what I would end up naming as various content types. And so I started with that. I started with that and the published content. So I started with her strategy, which was hugely necessary. I couldn't have done what I did without having that context.
That's something that's changed a lot over the last 20 years too. The engaging a UX person in a marketing website, that didn't used to happen, at least in my experience. So.
Yeah. Well, we're all about the journey and making sure people can get to do what they want. So the UX strategists and the content strategists worked hand in glove.
Yeah, cool. Hey, Kate, I can't believe it. We're already coming up close to time. But before we wrap up, I want to make sure, is there anything that's come up in the conversation you want to elaborate on, or just anything that's on your mind about structured content? And
only to say, I think we are hugely excited about what's happening. There's lots going on. The work. One really good example of the benefits of what we're doing, quite a few weeks ago, with all the horrific things going on in Ukraine, obviously we had to sort of change how PayPal operates in the Ukraine. So in something like 3 or 4 days, we managed to spin up, we took down the main Ukraine site and just put up a standalone page where there's huge machinations in the background to understand what can and can't we do in Ukraine from a business perspective. But once that was established, in sort of about 3 days, we had a page up on the site, done, published, live and available. And that was done in the CMS. So this is, if without the CMS, we would not have been able to do that. It would have taken much, much longer. So that's just to say, hugely exciting stuff is happening, and we're seeing the benefits of it sort of already in that example, like I said. And we are always hiring. So we are definitely looking for more content strategists, and if anyone is interested in content architecture, I'm the only one. Come and join me.
Okay, I'll make sure I put a link to the PayPal jobs page in the show notes. Sure. Hey, and which is also the very last thing I'd like to get, Kate. What's the best way for folks to stay connected and connect with you online, or just stay in touch?
I think LinkedIn. I don't really do Twitter at all. So LinkedIn is best, and hopefully you'll have my link there.
Yeah, I'll include that in the show notes as well.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Kate. Super fun conversation. I really enjoyed this.
Cool. Yeah, it was great talking with you. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you can think of a friend who might enjoy this episode, please share it with them. And please join us again for our next content strategy interview.